There's a difference between helping and being used. The day you learn it, you stop apologizing for saving yourself. The words hung in the air of my empty apartment like smoke from a candle I'd just blown out. I'd been practicing saying them for weeks now, watching my reflection in the bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning when the house was still quiet and my thoughts could finally hear themselves think. But sitting here now, boxes packed and labeled around me like soldiers in formation, the weight of what I'd done settled into my bones deeper than any Houston summer heat ever had. My name is Evelyn May Carter, and I'm 68 years old. I spent 33 years as a 911 dispatcher in the city, my voice the last thread connecting strangers to hope when their worlds were falling apart. You learn things in that chair that Sunday school never taught you. How to count compressions over a phone line while someone's husband is turning blue on their kitchen floor. How to whisper instructions to a woman hiding in her closet until the sirens drown out her husband's rage. How to keep your voice steady when a child calls because mommy won't wake up. You don't leave that job the same person who walked in. You leave knowing that every second has weight, every breath has value, and every promise you make better be one you can keep. I raised Darius in a 2-bedroom apartment on Tidwell Road, where the air conditioner wheezed like an old man with too many cigarettes behind him, and the floors creaked their disapproval every time you tried to walk quiet. But those walls held rules that never bent, not even when the lights got cut off or when I had to choose between groceries and his school supplies. Do your homework. Tell the truth. Leave every place better than you found it. I taught that boy to bleach a sink until it gleamed like Sunday morning, to hem a sleeve so neat you'd think the thread grew there, and to say sorry without putting conditions after it like you were negotiating a contract. The irony wasn't lost on me now, sitting in this new apartment with windows that actually opened and walls that didn't know my secrets yet. I'd spent 15 years trying to leave Darius's world better than I found it, and somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to apply those same rules to myself. It started 2 years ago, after the hip surgery that left me moving like a question mark for months. Darius called me from the hospital parking lot while I was still loopy from anesthesia, his voice carrying that particular strain of worry that children never quite learn to hide from their mothers, no matter how grown they get. "Mama, me and Keisha been talking," he'd said, and I could hear her in the background, probably bouncing baby Marcus on her hip while 4-year-old Tiana practiced her letters at the kitchen table, and the twins, barely walking then, left sticky fingerprints on everything they could reach. "We want you to come stay with us. Just until you heal up proper. We got that in-law suite built onto the back. It's got its own bathroom and everything. We got you." It felt like grace dropping down from heaven when you hadn't even remembered to pray for it. I'd been living on Social Security and a dispatcher's pension that stretched about as far as a dollar store elastic band, in an apartment where the neighbors played music like they were trying to raise the dead, and the parking lot floods every time a cloud looked sideways at the pavement. The thought of my own space, my own key, my own quiet, it sounded like a promise I didn't know I needed. Just for a little while, Keisha had added when she took the phone, her voice bright with the kind of energy that comes from solving problems before they get too heavy to lift. "Until you're back on your feet. Family takes care of family, Miss Evelyn." I should have known better. In 33 years of dispatch, I'd learned that the worst emergencies always start with someone saying everything's going to be fine. The in-law suite was lovely, I'll give them that. Fresh paint and new carpet, a little kitchenette with a microwave that didn't spark, and a bathroom with grab bars installed like they'd actually thought about my needs instead of just my presence. The first few weeks felt like a vacation I hadn't known I was taking. Keisha would knock on my door in the mornings with coffee already fixed the way I liked it, 2 sugars, and enough cream to make it look like caramel. Darius would stop by after work, still in his uniform from the shipping company, to ask if I needed anything from the store or if the air conditioning was keeping me comfortable. But kindness has a way of shifting when it stops being a choice and starts being an expectation. It began small, the way erosion always does. "Mama, can you watch the baby while I run to the store real quick?" became, "Mama, Can you keep Marcus for a few hours while Keisha gets her hair done? Which became all day Saturday while they went to some cousin's birthday party that apparently wasn't the kind of family gathering that included grandmothers. The fridge started filling up with food that had everyone's name on it except mine, while my own groceries got absorbed into family meals I cooked but somehow never got invited to plan. Tiana, my oldest grandbaby, started coming to my door after school instead of the main house. At first, I thought it was because she missed me, because children have a way of gravitating towards stillness when their world gets too loud. She'd curl up on my little sofa with her homework spread across my coffee table like she was claiming territory, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth the way Darius used to do when he was concentrating. "Mama and Daddy are arguing again," she'd say without looking up from her math worksheet, her voice carrying that careful flatness that children develop when they've learned that emotions are inconvenient for the adults around them. "Can I stay here until they stop?" I'd make her a snack and help her with long division, and by the time we finished, the main house would be quiet again, ready to receive her back like nothing had happened. But the pattern was setting, deep as tree roots, and I was becoming less of a grandmother and more of a professional problem solver who just happened to share their DNA. The twins, Jaden and Jordan, barely 2 years old and wild as March weather, started spending mornings with me when daycare was full or when they had the sniffles, but not quite sick enough to justify Darius taking time off work. I'd wake up to Keisha knocking on my door at 6:30 in the morning, already dressed for her job at the bank, holding 2 sippy cups and a diaper bag like she was passing a relay baton. "They just need breakfast and cartoons until about noon," she'd say, already backing toward her car. "Keisha's picking them up after her lunch break." "You're a lifesaver, Miss Evelyn." But lifesavers are emergency equipment, something you grab when you're drowning, not something you rely on for your daily swim. And I was starting to feel like I'd been treading water so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to have my feet touch solid ground. Marcus, the youngest then, was still nursing, which meant middle-of-the-night visits when Keisha was too exhausted to function and Darius had to work early. I'd find myself rocking that baby in my arms at 3 in the morning, walking the length of my little suite while he fussed and squirmed, too tired to be awake but too hungry to sleep. During the day, he'd nap in the pack-and-play they'd moved into my living room, and I'd find myself planning my entire day around a schedule, tiptoeing around my own home like I was the guest. My phone started ringing with calls meant for them. School offices wanting to confirm pickup procedures, pediatrician offices calling about appointment reminders, even the electric company wanting to discuss payment arrangements. Somehow, in the space of 6 months, I'd become the emergency contact, the backup plan, and the primary caregiver all at once, without anyone ever actually asking if that was a role I wanted to play. The worst part wasn't the work itself. I'd raised a child before, and muscle memory is a powerful thing. I knew how to make breakfast for small people who changed their minds about what they wanted between the kitchen and the table. I knew how to braid hair tight enough to last through a playground, but gentle enough not to give anyone a headache. I knew how to read the same bedtime story 17 times with enthusiasm, because children need consistency more than adults need variety. The worst part was the disappearing. Somewhere between "can you watch them for an hour" and having 4 car seats permanently installed in my old Honda, I'd stopped being Evelyn May Carter and started being Miss Evelyn, a position that came with all the responsibilities of motherhood, but none of the authority. I couldn't make rules that stuck. I couldn't discipline without someone questioning my methods. I couldn't even rearrange my own furniture without someone commenting on whether it was safe for the children. I was living in my own home, like I was renting space in someone else's life. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday had for months. Keisha knocked on my door at 6:15 in the morning, earlier than usual, with all 4 children trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother to water. "Emergency at work," she said, already pulling on her jacket. "Darius had to leave early for some delivery thing, and daycare doesn't open until 7. Can you take them?" "I'll pick them up right after work, I promise." Tiana, now 8 and too smart for her own good, rolled her eyes in that way children do when they've heard the same promise broken too many times to believe it anymore. The twins were still in their pajamas, clutching stuffed animals and looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus, barely walking and cranky from being woken up too early, reached his arms up to me with that universal baby signal that meant I was now responsible for his emotional state until further notice. "Of course, baby," I heard myself say, the same words I'd been saying for months, my voice operating on autopilot while my heart started sending up warning flares. "Y'all go ahead. We'll be fine." And we were fine, in that surface-level way that keeps the machinery running, but doesn't address the grinding noise coming from the engine. I made pancakes and helped with homework and refereed sibling disputes and cleaned up spilled juice and changed diapers and answered phone calls from teachers who knew my voice better than they knew the children's actual parents. I packed lunches and braided hair and found lost shoes and dispensed hugs and Band-Aids and the kind of patient wisdom that only comes from having survived raising someone else's entire childhood once before. Keisha called at 3 to say she'd be late picking them up, something about overtime and opportunity and how this promotion could really change things for their family. She'd call when she was on her way. Darius texted around 5 that his delivery had turned into 2 deliveries, and he wouldn't be home until after dinner. The children and I ate leftover spaghetti and watched cartoons and played board games until their eyes started getting heavy, and they began that particular kind of whining that means bedtime is overdue, but no one wants to admit it. By 8 o'clock, I'd moved them all to the main house and tucked them into their own beds, reading stories and getting drinks of water and checking for monsters under beds, because that's what you do when you're responsible for small people who still believe in things that hide in dark corners. I left the porch light on and went back to my suite, my hip aching from a day of chasing toddlers and my heart aching from something I couldn't quite name yet. Keisha's car pulled into the driveway at 9:47. I know because I was watching the clock, the way you do when you're waiting for someone who said they'd be right back, and right back turned into an entire day. I heard her key in the front door, heard her heels clicking across the hardwood, heard the house settling into whatever passed for normal in their world. She never knocked on my door to say thank you. She never called to check if I needed anything. She never acknowledged that I'd just spent 16 hours being responsible for her children while she and my son lived their adult lives like parenthood was something they could schedule around their other commitments. That night, I sat in my little kitchenette with a cup of tea gone cold and a legal pad I'd pulled from the drawer, and I started writing down everything I could remember. Every early morning and late evening. Every sick day and school holiday. Every forgotten pickup and emergency babysitting session. Every meal cooked and load of laundry folded and homework assignment supervised. Every birthday party I'd hosted because they were too busy, and every doctor's appointment I'd attended because I was already familiar with the children's schedules. The number started adding up in ways that made my hands shake. 15 years. That's how long I'd been the unofficial, unpaid, always available backup parent. It started when Tiana was born, and I took early retirement to help with those first overwhelming months when Darius was working 2 jobs and Keisha was trying to finish college. It continued through the twins' arrival, when suddenly 2 babies and a toddler needed more hands than 2 adults could provide. It stretched through Marcus's birth and every crisis and convenience in between. I'd been calculating conservatively. 8 hours here, 12 hours there, overnight stays, weekend coverage, school breaks when daycare was closed, sick days when they couldn't afford to miss work. But when I really thought about it, really added up the full scope of what I'd been providing, it wasn't part-time help anymore. It was full-time childcare by someone with 30 years of experience in crisis management, happening 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year, for a decade and a half. The local daycare center charged $35 an hour for professional childcare services. For after-hours and overnight care, they charged time and a half. For multiple children, there were additional fees per child. For last-minute requests, which described about 60% of my services, there was an emergency surcharge. I'd never charged them a penny. I started writing down everything I could remember, year by year, child by child. The time Tiana had pneumonia, and I stayed with her for 4 days straight while Keisha and Darius both went to work because someone had to pay the bills. This summer, I kept all 3 children for 2 weeks while they went on a cruise to celebrate their anniversary, calling it a grandparents' vacation like I was getting something out of watching kids who weren't used to my rules or my schedule. The countless nights I'd gotten calls at 2 in the morning because Marcus was teething or one of the twins had an ear infection, and could I please come help because they had important meetings in the morning. Every school pickup when they were running late. Every parent-teacher conference I attended because their work schedules couldn't accommodate a 30-minute appointment about their child's education. Every Halloween costume I'd sewn because buying one was too expensive, but Grandma's time was apparently free. Every birthday cake I'd baked, every Christmas morning I'd hosted, every family dinner I'd cooked while they showed up just in time to eat and leave the dishes for me to handle. I'd been subsidizing their entire adult lives, and they'd been so comfortable with the arrangement that they'd stopped seeing it as help and started seeing it as my job. The final number, calculated conservatively and rounded down to account for the impossibility of perfect memory, was staggering. Over $1 million in professional childcare services provided free of charge by someone who had her own bills to pay and her own life to live. But it wasn't really about the money. Money was just the language I could use to speak a truth that had been getting lost in translation for 15 years. The real cost was measured in dreams deferred and choices stolen, and a woman who'd been so busy being useful that she'd forgotten how to be herself. I'd been planning to travel when I retired. I'd had a list of places I wanted to see and things I wanted to do, and ways I wanted to spend the time I'd earned after 3 decades of holding other people's emergencies in my hands. Instead, I'd spent my retirement being a full-time grandmother to children whose parents had never actually asked if that was how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. I'd been planning to date again, maybe even marry again after spending most of my adult life focused on raising Darius and building a career. I'd had gentlemen friends, kind men from church and the community center who'd asked me to dinner or dancing, or just to sit on a porch swing and talk about books and dreams, and whether it was too late to plant a garden. But how do you build a new relationship when you're never available because someone always needs you to watch the children? I'd been planning to take classes, maybe learn to paint or speak Spanish, or finally read all those books that had been gathering dust while I was busy making sure everyone else's life ran smoothly. I'd been planning to volunteer at the literacy center or the animal shelter, or somewhere that my skills could help people who actually want to help, instead of people who'd grown so accustomed to my presence that they'd stopped seeing it as generous and started seeing it as required. The invoice I typed up that night wasn't really a bill. It was a mirror, reflecting back 15 years of choices that I'd made out of love, but that had somehow curdled into obligation. It was a statement of value for time that had been treated as worthless because it belonged to someone who'd never learned to charge for her worth. I printed it on good paper, the kind you use for important documents, and I used the letterhead from my old dispatch job because I wanted it to look official, professional, serious. At the top, I put their address and the date, just like any other business correspondence. Below that, in calm, clear language, I itemized 15 years of services rendered. Childcare services, per hour, $35, with documentation of dates and duration where my memory allowed for specificity. After-hours care, per hour, $52.50. Overnight care, per occurrence, $280, which was actually less than most babysitting services charge for sleeping over with someone else's children. Holiday and weekend coverage, calculated separately, because that's premium time that should come with premium compensation. Emergency services, the kind that came with less than 4 hours notice, an additional 50% surcharge, because my time had value even when their planning didn't account for it. Mileage for school pickups and doctor's appointments and grocery runs with children in tow, calculated at the federal rate for business travel. The hidden costs of hosting family holidays and birthday parties, providing meals and entertainment, and cleanup services for events that were apparently my responsibility to organize and execute. I added a section for educational services, homework supervision, reading practice, math tutoring, science project assistance, because teaching children is skilled labor that requires patience and knowledge and the ability to explain complex concepts in ways that small minds can grasp. I included household management services, because someone had to coordinate schedules and maintain calendars and remember which child needed what permission slip signed when. The total, calculated conservatively and rounded down because love is supposed to count for something, came to just over $1 million. Net 30, like any other business transaction, because even family should understand that services have value and value deserves recognition. At the bottom, I added a note. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these services to your family. Please remit payment within 30 days or contact me to discuss alternative arrangements for future childcare needs. I signed it with my full name, Evelyn May Carter, not Mama or Miss Evelyn or Grandma or any of the titles that had been used to make my work invisible. I folded it into a business envelope and wrote their names on the front with the same careful penmanship I'd used for 30 years of dispatch reports, when accuracy and clarity could mean the difference between life and death. The walk to their mailbox felt longer than it actually was, my feet carrying me across a distance that measured more than just the space between my suite and their front porch. With every step, I was crossing from being a woman who apologized for having needs to being someone who understood that her time had value, her energy had limits, and her love was a gift that shouldn't be mistaken for a guarantee. I slipped the envelope into their mailbox and raised the red flag, the same way I'd done 1,000 times before with electric bills and school forms and all the other paperwork that keeps a family functioning. But this time, I wasn't mailing someone else's responsibility. I was mailing my own voice, finally speaking loud enough to be heard over 15 years of whispered resentment and swallowed frustration. Walking back to my suite, I felt something I hadn't experienced in longer than I could remember. The dizzy, terrifying, exhilarating sensation of not knowing what would happen next. For 15 years, I'd been living in someone else's story, playing a supporting role in a drama where my needs were either invisible or inconvenient. But that invoice changed the script. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was the main character in my own life again, and I had no idea how the story would end. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in my little living room, surrounded by furniture that belonged to me and silence that belonged to me and time that, for the moment, was entirely my own. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood waking up, dogs barking, cars starting, children laughing as they waited for school buses. Normal life, continuing its normal rhythm, while inside my little suite, everything had changed. The phone rang around noon. Keisha's name flashed on the caller ID, and for a moment I considered not answering. But 33 years of dispatch training had taught me that avoiding difficult conversations only makes them more difficult, and I'd spent too many years being diplomatic when what I needed to be was direct. Miss Evelyn? Her voice carried that particular strain of someone trying to sound calm while their world tilts sideways. Did you put something in our mailbox? I did, I said, settling back into my favorite chair with a phone balanced between my shoulder and ear the way I used to do during long dispatch shifts. Did you have a chance to review it? The pause that followed lasted long enough for me to count my heartbeats, each one steady and sure in a way that surprised me. I'd expected to feel nervous or guilty or apologetic. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Completely, entirely honest. This is a joke, right? She finally said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background, could picture her standing in her kitchen with the invoice spread across the counter like evidence of some crime she couldn't quite identify. You're not seriously charging us for being a grandmother. I'm not charging you for being a grandmother, I said, keeping my voice level the way I used to when someone called 911 in the middle of a panic attack and needed me to be their anchor to reality. I'm charging you for being a full-time childcare provider. There's a difference. But you live here for free. The words came out sharper than she probably intended, carrying the edge of someone who'd never had to examine the assumptions that made their life possible. That's your payment. We let you live here, and you help with the kids. That's the arrangement. I looked around my suite, at the grab bars I'd paid to have installed, at the furniture I'd moved from my old apartment, at the groceries in the refrigerator that I'd bought with my own Social Security check. I thought about the property taxes I'd helped pay when their mortgage company sent a notice threatening foreclosure. I thought about the utility bills I'd covered when their paychecks didn't stretch far enough to keep the lights on, and 4 children needed electricity for homework and meals and all the basic requirements of childhood. Keisha, I said, and something in my voice must have warned her that this conversation was about to go deeper than she'd planned, because the background noise stopped and I could tell she was giving me her full attention. I don't live here for free. I pay rent in labor that you've never learned to calculate because it comes from someone you've been trained to see as family rather than help. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear the air conditioning cycling on in the main house, a sound I knew as well as my own heartbeat after 2 years of living close enough to hear every mechanical sigh of their daily life. We never asked you to do all that stuff, she said finally, but her voice had lost some of its edge, replaced by something that sounded almost like uncertainty. You just did it. We thought you wanted to. I did want to, I admitted, because the truth deserved to be complete even when it was complicated. I wanted to help y'all build the life you were dreaming about. I wanted to be the kind of grandmother who was there when you needed me. But somewhere along the way, wanting to help became being required to help, and being available became being taken for granted. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see her processing this information like someone trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces and no picture on the box to guide her. So, what are you saying? She asked. You want us to pay you $1 million? I'm saying I want you to understand what you've been receiving, I said, standing up from my chair, because some conversations require you to be on your feet, ready to move in whatever direction the truth takes you. For 15 years, I've been providing professional-level childcare services at family prices, which is to say, for free. I've been subsidizing your entire adult lives with my time and my energy and my choices, and y'all have been so comfortable with that arrangement that you stopped seeing it as generosity and started seeing it as my job. But we're family, she said, and I could hear something desperate creeping into her voice, the sound of someone watching their understanding of reality crack down the middle. Family helps family. That's what family does. Family does help family, I agreed. But help is something you ask for, not something you expect. Help is something you appreciate, not something you take for granted. And help goes both directions, Keisha. When's the last time anybody in this family asked what I needed? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I knew we'd both found the heart of the problem. For 15 years, I'd been so focused on being useful that I'd forgotten to be human, and they'd been so comfortable with my usefulness that they'd forgotten I was anything more than a solution to their scheduling problems. I don't know, she said quietly, and I could hear the beginning of something that sounded like understanding in her voice. I don't know what you need. I need to be asked instead of told, I said, settling back into my chair because this was going to take a while and honesty requires comfort to flourish. I need my time to be treated like it has value, not like it's just sitting around waiting for someone else to need it. I need to be included in decisions about how I spend my days instead of being informed about plans that have already been made for me. But the baby, she said, and I could hear her fighting tears, could picture her standing in that kitchen with one hand on her belly and the other holding on to whatever remained of the life she thought she understood. Number 6 is coming, Miss Evelyn. I don't know how we're going to manage without you. And there it was, the truth that had been lurking under every conversation we'd never had, every assumption that had been made about my availability and my choices and my future. They weren't just expecting me to continue providing free childcare, they were expecting me to expand my services to include a sixth child, without anyone ever asking if that was something I wanted or was capable of doing. "Baby," I said, and the endearment slipped out before I could stop it, carrying 15 years of love and frustration and the particular exhaustion that comes from being needed by people who never stop to wonder if you need anything in return. That's exactly why we're having this conversation now instead of after the baby comes. Because we need to figure out what help looks like when it's actually helpful instead of just convenient. She was crying now. I could hear it in the way her breath caught, and the way her words came out fractured and unsteady. "I don't know how to do this, Miss Evelyn. I don't know how to be a mother of 6 kids without someone to help me. I feel like I'm drowning most days already." My heart cracked a little at that admission, because I remembered what it felt like to be overwhelmed by the responsibility of raising small people who needed more than you felt capable of giving. I remembered the bone-deep exhaustion and the constant worry, and the way motherhood could make you feel like you were failing even when you were doing your best. "Then maybe," I said gently, "we need to talk about help that actually helps instead of help that just moves the drowning from one person to another." That afternoon, Darius came to see me. I heard his truck pull into the driveway around 4:30, heard his work boots on the front steps, heard the familiar rhythm of his walk as he made his way to my door. But instead of his usual quick knock and immediate entry, he stood on my little porch for a long moment, and I could feel him gathering himself the way people do when they're about to have a conversation they don't know how to start. When he finally knocked, it was different from his usual confident rap. Softer. More hesitant. Like he was asking permission instead of announcing his presence. "Come in, baby," I called, because some things don't change even when everything else does, and he would always be my baby no matter how complicated our relationship became. He stood in my doorway looking like he was 12 years old again, caught between wanting to run toward me and wanting to run away, his hands shoved deep in his work pants pockets and his shoulders carrying the weight of something too heavy for comfort. "Mama," he said, and then stopped, like the word itself contained everything he wanted to say but couldn't figure out how to arrange into sentences. "Sit down, son," I said, gesturing toward the sofa where he'd spent countless hours as a child, doing homework and watching cartoons and learning how to be the kind of man who kept his word and treated people with dignity. "We need to talk." He sat on the edge of the cushion like he was ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble, his hands clasped together, so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. "Keisha showed me the paper you sent." "The invoice," I said, because words matter, and we might as well use the right ones. "Yes, I thought she might." "Mama, you can't be serious about this." He looked up at me with eyes that were still the same warm brown they'd been when he was small, still carrying that same mixture of love and confusion that had marked most of our difficult conversations over the years. "It's $1 million. "It is," I agreed. "That's what 15 years of professional childcare costs when you calculate it honestly instead of pretending it's worthless, because it comes from family." "But we never asked you to keep track," he said, his voice carrying that particular strain of someone who is trying to find solid ground in a conversation that kept shifting under his feet. We needed help and you were there. We thought you wanted to be there." I studied his face, this man I'd raised with my own hands and my own heart, looking for traces of the little boy who used to come to me with skinned knees and hurt feelings and complete faith that his mama could fix anything that was broken. He was still there, under the stubble and the work clothes and the weight of adult responsibilities that had come faster than he'd been ready to handle them. "I did want to be there," I said, leaning forward in my chair, because this was the kind of conversation that required full attention and complete honesty. "But wanting to help and being required to help are two different things, Darius. And somewhere along the way, y'all stopped asking for help and started expecting it." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I recognized from his childhood, something he did when he was trying to solve a problem that felt too big for his understanding. I don't understand the difference. The difference, I said, settling back because this was going to require some explanation, is choice. When someone asks for help, you can say yes or no based on your own capacity and circumstances. When someone expects help, saying no becomes selfish instead of self-care. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, and I realized that maybe I was. For 15 years, I'd been speaking fluent self-sacrifice while he'd been learning to speak entitled assumption, and we'd been having completely different conversations while using the same words. I need you to think about something for me, I said, keeping my voice gentle because this wasn't about punishment, it was about understanding. In the last year, how many times did someone in this family ask what I needed before they asked what I could provide? The silence that followed was long enough for me to hear the central air conditioning cycling through its rhythm, long enough for the afternoon light to shift across my living room floor, long enough for him to really consider the question instead of just reacting to it. I don't know, he said finally, his voice small in a way that reminded me of every time he'd had to admit to breaking something important. I guess we just assumed you'd tell us if you needed something. Baby, I said, and I reached across the space between us to touch his hand, because some truths are easier to hear when they come with physical comfort. I've been telling you what I needed for 2 years. I've been saying it with every tired sigh, every reluctant yes, every morning when I looked like I'd rather be anywhere else but standing in your kitchen making breakfast for children who aren't my responsibility anymore. He looked down at our joined hands, his calloused from manual labor, mine soft from retirement, and marked with the age spots that announce the passage of time whether you're ready or not. We thought you liked it, he said quietly. Taking care of the kids, being part of their daily life. You never said you didn't want to. I did like parts of it, I admitted, because the truth was more complicated than simple resentment. I love those children more than my own life, and I wanted to be part of their world. But I didn't want to disappear into their world. I didn't want to stop being Evelyn May Carter and become just Miss Evelyn, the woman whose only value is her availability. He lifted his head to look at me, and I could see something shifting in his expression, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Is that how we made you feel? Like you didn't matter except for what you could do for us? Not intentionally, I said, squeezing his hand because intention matters even when impact matters more. But yes, that's exactly how I felt. Like I was useful, but not valued. Like I was convenient, but not considered. The tears came then, sliding down his cheeks the way they used to when he was small and had discovered that the world was more complicated and less fair than he'd been prepared to handle. Mama, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to be like that. I thought we were taking care of each other. We were, I said, pulling a tissue from the box on my end table and handing it to him because some conversations require tissues and time and the kind of patience that only comes from loving someone enough to let them hurt while they learn. But taking care of each other means everybody gets taken care of, not just the people whose needs are louder or more immediate. He wiped his eyes and took a shaky breath, the kind that signals someone is trying to pull themselves together while their world rearranges itself around new information. What do you want us to do, Mama? About the invoice, I mean. We don't have $1 million. I don't want your money, baby, I said, and I could see the confusion cross his face like a shadow. That invoice wasn't about collecting a debt. It was about showing you the value of something you'd learned to take for granted. Then what do you want? I stood up from my chair and walked to the window that looked out over their backyard, where a swing set I'd helped them assemble sat empty in the late afternoon sun, where toys I'd helped organize were scattered across grass I'd watched grow while keeping children who needed fresh air and supervision. It was a beautiful yard, well-maintained and child-friendly, and full of evidence that this was a family that cared about providing good things for their children. I want to be asked instead of told, I said, watching a squirrel investigate one of the twins' abandoned trucks. I want my time to be treated like it has value. I want to be included in decisions about how I spend my days instead of informed about plans that have already been made for me. I turned back to face him, this son I'd raised to be honorable and kind, who'd somehow forgotten that honor and kindness were supposed to extend to everyone, even the people who'd always been there when you needed them. Most of all, I continued, I want you to understand that love isn't supposed to be a prison. I love y'all enough to die for you, but that doesn't mean I'm supposed to disappear for you. There's a difference between helping someone build their dreams and sacrificing your own dreams to make their life more convenient. He nodded slowly, like someone absorbing instructions for a task they'd never performed before. How do we fix this, Mama? How do we do better? The question carried such genuine bewilderment that my heart softened despite everything. He really didn't know. They really hadn't understood that their convenience was built on someone else's sacrifice, because I'd been so good at making that sacrifice invisible, so practiced at absorbing their needs without expressing my own. We start by having honest conversations about what help looks like when it's actually helpful, I said, returning to my chair because this conversation was far from over and my hip was reminding me that I wasn't as young as I used to be. We start by asking instead of assuming. We start by understanding that my love for this family doesn't obligate me to provide unlimited labor. But the new baby, he said, and there was that desperation again, the sound of someone drowning who'd suddenly realized their life preserver was a person who could also drown.
Keisha scudded, Mama.
She doesn't think she can handle 6 kids without help. Then maybe, I said gently, y'all need to have some conversations about what handling 6 kids looks like when the help you've been counting on isn't unlimited. The color drained from his face as the full implications hit him. Are you saying you won't help at all anymore? I'm saying I won't be taken for granted anymore, I corrected. I'm saying that help is something you ask for, not something you expect. I'm saying that my time has value and my energy has limits, and if you want my assistance, you need to respect both of those things. He sat quietly for several minutes, and I could practically hear the wheels turning as he tried to imagine their daily life without the foundation of unlimited grandparent labor they'd built it on. School pickups and doctor's appointments and sick days and date nights and all the small emergencies that come with raising multiple children. Who would handle those things when I wasn't automatically available? What would that look like? He asked finally. Asking properly, I mean. I smiled despite everything, because he was trying, and effort counts for something even when it comes late. It looks like calling to ask if I'm available instead of knocking on my door to announce what you need. It looks like accepting no as an answer without making me feel guilty for having boundaries. It looks like offering to pay for services that would cost money if you hired anyone else. Pay you to babysit your own grandchildren? He sounded genuinely shocked, like I'd suggested something scandalous. Pay me to provide professional childcare services for extended periods, I corrected. There's a difference between babysitting and what I've been doing, Darius. Babysitting is a few hours here and there. What I've been providing is full-time childcare by someone with 30 years of experience managing emergencies. He was quiet again, processing this reframe of services he'd been trained to see as grandmotherly duty rather than professional labor. And if we can't afford to pay, he asked, then you figure out other solutions, I said simply. The same way you'd figure out other solutions if I didn't exist.
Daycare.
After-school programs. Family leave policies. Actual childcare arrangements that don't depend on someone else giving up their retirement to make your life possible. The weight of that reality settled on his shoulders like a heavy coat, and I watched him realize that they'd been living beyond their means in ways that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with time and energy, and the assumption that family labor was infinite and free. I need to talk to Keisha, he said finally, standing up from the sofa like someone preparing for a difficult journey. We need to figure some things out. Yes, you do, I agreed, walking him to the door, because some conversations end with people needing space to think. And, Darius? I love you, I love all of y'all. But love doesn't mean I'm supposed to disappear into your needs. It means I care enough about this family to insist that we all treat each other with dignity and respect, even when it's inconvenient. He hugged me then, the kind of tight, desperate embrace that says everything words can't carry, and I hugged him back because love is complicated, but it doesn't have to be conditional. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered into my shoulder. I'm sorry we made you feel like you didn't matter. You matter too, baby, I said, rubbing his back the way I used to when he was small, and the world felt too big and scary to navigate alone. Y'all matter enough to learn how to do better. We all do. The next few days passed quietly, with none of the usual morning knocks on my door or last-minute requests for emergency childcare. I could hear life continuing in the main house, children getting ready for school, adults rushing around with their morning routines, the familiar sounds of a busy family managing their daily chaos. But for the first time in 2 years, none of that chaos automatically became my responsibility. It felt strange and peaceful and terrifying all at once. I used the time to think, really think, about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. Not what other people needed from me, but what I needed for myself. The realization that I'd almost forgotten how to want things that weren't connected to other people's needs hit me like a revelation. I wanted to travel. Not elaborate vacations to exotic places, but simple trips to see parts of the country I never had time to explore. I wanted to wake up in the morning and decide how to spend my day based on my own interests rather than someone else's schedule. I wanted to take a painting class, maybe learn to garden properly, definitely read all the books that had been waiting patiently on my shelf while I was busy being indispensable to everyone except myself. I wanted to date again, to remember what it felt like to dress up for dinner with a man who was interested in my thoughts and dreams rather than my availability for childcare. I wanted to have conversations about books and movies and politics and philosophy, the kind of deep discussions that required uninterrupted time and mental energy that wasn't already committed to managing other people's emergencies. Most of all, I wanted to remember who Evelyn May Carter was when she wasn't defined by her usefulness to other people. On Thursday morning, Keisha knocked on my door. Not the usual urgent rap followed by immediate entry, but a hesitant tap that waited for permission. When I opened the door, she was standing on my porch holding a cup of coffee and looking like someone who'd spent several sleepless nights wrestling with uncomfortable truths. "Can we talk?" she asked, and her voice carried none of its usual confidence, none of the assumption that my time was automatically available for whatever she needed to discuss. "Of course," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Sit down, baby. You look exhausted." She settled onto my sofa with the careful movements of someone in their second trimester, one hand automatically resting on the curve of her belly where baby number 6 was growing, blissfully unaware of the complicated negotiations their existence had sparked. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, staring down at her coffee cup like it held answers to questions she wasn't sure how to ask. "About help and expectations and how we've been treating you." I sat in my chair across from her and waited, because some conversations require space for people to find their own words rather than having words provided for them. "I didn't realize," she continued, her voice growing smaller with each word. "I mean, I knew you did a lot for us, but I didn't think about it as work. I thought you enjoyed it. I thought spending time with the kids was something you wanted to do." "Parts of it were," I said honestly, because the truth deserved to be complete even when it was complicated. "I love those children, Keisha. I love watching them grow and learn and become their own little people. But loving someone doesn't mean you're obligated to provide unlimited free labor in service of that love." She nodded, tears starting to track down her cheeks. "I talked to my sister in Atlanta, the one with 3 kids. I asked her what she pays for after-school care and summer coverage and emergency babysitting." She paused to wipe her eyes with a tissue from the box I'd placed on the coffee table. "Miss Evelyn, she spends more in 2 months than I make in 6 months at the bank." "Professional childcare is expensive," I agreed. That's why most families plan their finances around childcare costs the same way they plan around mortgage payments and car notes. We never planned, she admitted. We knew you were there. We knew you'd help. It never occurred to me to think about what that help was worth or what it was costing you. She looked up at me then, her eyes red with exhaustion and regret and the particular overwhelm that comes from realizing you've been building your life on someone else's unacknowledged sacrifice. I don't know how to do this without you, she said, her voice breaking. 6 kids, Miss Evelyn. I can barely handle the 4 I have now, and that's with you picking up all the pieces I keep dropping. My heart ached for her, because I remembered that feeling, that bone-deep terror of being responsible for small lives that needed more than you felt capable of giving. But my sympathy didn't erase the need for boundaries, and compassion for her situation didn't obligate me to continue sacrificing my own well-being for her peace of mind. Then maybe, I said gently, this is a good time to have some honest conversations about family planning and realistic expectations. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Are you saying I shouldn't have this baby? I'm saying that having children is a choice that comes with responsibilities, and those responsibilities belong to the parents, not to the grandparents, I replied. I'm saying that if you can't afford professional childcare for 6 children, maybe you need to think seriously about how you're going to manage 6 children without expecting someone else to provide that care for free. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. We were both thinking about adoption, about difficult choices, about the reality that good intentions don't automatically create good outcomes, and that love alone doesn't solve practical problems. I can't, she whispered. I can't give up this baby. It's too late for that conversation. Then you need to have different conversations, I said. About daycare and after-school programs. About family leave policies and work schedules. About realistic budgeting that includes the actual cost of raising children. About support systems that don't depend on one person giving up their entire retirement to make your choices possible. She was crying harder now, the kind of tears that come from realizing that the life you thought you were building was constructed on foundations that were never as solid as they appeared. What if we paid you? She asked through her sobs. Not $1 million, obviously, but something. What if we treated this like a real job with real pay and boundaries and respect? I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine understanding rather than desperate negotiation. What would that look like, Keisha? Be specific. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath, clearly trying to pull together thoughts that had been scattered by emotion and exhaustion. We could pay you hourly, like you said. Maybe not as much as a professional service, because you're family, but something that shows we value your time. How much? I asked, because specifics matter when you're trying to determine whether someone understands the magnitude of what they're requesting. I don't know, she admitted. What would be fair? Fair would be market rate, I said. $35 an hour for regular childcare, time and a half for after hours and weekends, premium rates for holidays and emergencies. Fair would be scheduled hours with advance notice, not last-minute demands disguised as requests. Her face went pale as she did the mental math. Even part-time professional childcare would cost more than her monthly salary, more than they'd budgeted for, more than they could afford while maintaining their current lifestyle. We can't afford that, she said quietly. Then you can't afford to have me provide that level of service, I replied simply. Which means you need to figure out other arrangements. But what about family rates? She asked, desperation creeping back into her voice. What about doing it because you love us? Family rates assume that family labor is worth less than professional labor, I said. Love rates assume that love obligates someone to provide unlimited free services. Neither of those assumptions respect the person providing the labor, Keisha. She sat quietly for several minutes, staring down at her hands while the reality of her situation settled around her like fog. Without unlimited free grandparent labor, their family's entire structure would need to change. Work schedules, financial priorities, lifestyle choices, everything would need to be reconsidered. What if, she said slowly, we could figure out a way to pay you something, even if it's not full market rate? What if we treated it like a real job with real boundaries, but family pricing? I leaned back in my chair and considered the offer. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was more than I'd been receiving. More importantly, it represented recognition that my time had value and my energy had limits, which was more than I'd gotten in 15 years. What would family pricing look like?
I asked.
Maybe $20 an hour for scheduled childcare?
With advance notice, like you said.
And we'd pay time and a half for anything after 7 p.m. or on weekends. And no more last-minute emergencies unless it's a real emergency, like someone's in the hospital.
I did the math in my head.
$20 an hour was still below market rate, but it was infinitely more than the zero I'd been receiving. More importantly, it came with acknowledgement that my time was worth something and boundaries that would protect my energy from being completely consumed by their needs. And scheduled hours?
I asked.
Not unlimited availability. Maybe 20 hours a week? We could work out a schedule that covers the times we really need help, and anything beyond that would be extra and negotiated separately. 20 hours a week was manageable. It was enough to provide meaningful help without consuming my entire existence, enough to maintain my relationship with the grandchildren without disappearing into their daily care. And respect for no as an answer? I pressed. No guilt trips when I'm not available, no emergencies that aren't actually emergencies, no assumptions that my schedule automatically accommodates yours? Yes, she said quickly. Yes, absolutely. Miss Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I never meant to make you feel trapped or taken for granted. I got so used to you being there that I forgot you had a choice about it. I looked at this young woman I'd grown to love despite everything, pregnant with her sixth child and finally understanding that her survival strategy had been built on someone else's sacrifice. She wasn't a bad person. She was someone who'd been raised in a culture that taught women to expect unlimited labor from other women without questioning the cost of that expectation. Let me think about it, I said finally. This is a big decision, and I need to make sure I'm choosing what's best for me, not just what's most convenient for y'all. She nodded eagerly, relief flooding her features like sunrise after a long night. Of course. Take all the time you need. And Miss Evelyn, thank you for everything, for all the ways you've taken care of us, and for caring enough to teach us how to do better. After she left, I sat in my quiet living room and thought about the choice in front of me. I could accept their offer and continue providing childcare, but on my terms and with compensation that recognized the value of my time. Or I could decline and focus entirely on building the retirement I'd been dreaming about, free from the obligations and complications of being so deeply involved in their daily lives. Both choices had merit. Both choices had costs. If I accepted, I would continue to have a close relationship with my grandchildren, watching them grow and being part of their daily lives in ways that would create lasting memories for all of us. I would have income that could supplement my retirement and give me more financial flexibility. I would maintain my connection to this family I loved, even when that love was complicated by history and expectations. But I would also be committing to 20 hours a week of labor that, while compensated, would still limit my freedom and energy for other pursuits. I would be choosing to remain enmeshed in their family dynamics, subject to their schedules and their crises and their ongoing need for support. I would be saying yes to being useful when what I'd been craving was the chance to discover who I was when I wasn't needed. If I declined, I would have complete freedom to structure my retirement around my own interests and desires. I could travel, take classes, date, volunteer, explore all the possibilities that had been waiting patiently while I was busy being indispensable. I could discover who Evelyn May Carter was when she wasn't defined by her relationship to other people's needs. But I would also be stepping back from daily involvement in my grandchildren's lives, missing moments and milestones, and the particular joy that comes from being part of small people's growth and discovery. I would be choosing independence over intimacy, self-care over service, in ways that would inevitably change the texture of my relationships with this family I loved. The decision felt too big to make quickly, too important to get wrong. I needed time and perspective and maybe some advice from people who understood the complexities of family love and personal boundaries. That evening, I called my sister Dorothy in Dallas. At 72, she'd raised 3 children and helped with numerous grandchildren while maintaining her own career and interests. If anyone would understand the balance between family obligations and personal fulfillment, it would be Dorothy. "Well, it's about time," she said when I finished telling her the whole story. "I've been wondering when you were going to get tired of being that family's unpaid employee." "Dorothy," I protested, but she cut me off. "Don't Dorothy me, Evelyn May. I've been watching you disappear into that boy's family for 15 years, and every time I try to say something, you tell me how much you enjoyed helping and how blessed you felt to be needed." Her voice carried the particular authority of an older sister who'd been holding her tongue for too long. Helping is one thing. Being taken advantage of is something else entirely. "They didn't mean to take advantage," I said, because fairness required acknowledgement of intention even when impact was more important than intent. "Maybe not consciously," Dorothy agreed. "But impact matters more than intention, baby sister. And the impact was that you gave up your retirement, your freedom, your chance to build the life you wanted so they could have the life they wanted without paying market prices for childcare." "So what would you do?" I asked. "If you were me, what would you choose?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment, and I could picture her in her little house in Oak Cliff, surrounded by the art she painted and the books she read and the evidence of a life lived on her own terms even while maintaining close relationships with her children and grandchildren. "I'd take their offer," she said finally. "But not because of the money, and not because they need me. I'd take it because 20 hours a week with clear boundaries is different from unlimited availability with no recognition. I'd take it because you love those babies and they love you, and that's worth something even when it's complicated." "But what about my retirement dreams?" I asked. "What about travel and classes and dating and all the things I've been putting off?" "Baby, you're 68, not 98, Dorothy laughed. 20 hours a week still leaves you 48 hours for your own life. The question isn't whether you'll have time for your dreams. It's whether you'll have the courage to pursue them even while you're helping raise your grandbabies." She was right, of course. The choice wasn't between complete freedom and complete servitude. It was between different versions of a life that could include both service and self-care, both family love and personal fulfillment. "And Dorothy," she added, "that invoice you sent them? That was the smartest thing you've done in years. Not because you wanted their money, but because you made them see the value of something they'd learned to take for granted. That took courage, and it changed the entire dynamic of your relationship. Don't underestimate the power of that shift." The next morning, I called Keisha and told her I'd accept their offer, with some additional conditions. We would have a written agreement that spelled out expectations, boundaries, and compensation. We would have monthly check-ins to assess how the arrangement was working for everyone involved. And most importantly, I would maintain my right to modify or terminate the agreement if it stopped working for me, without guilt or negotiation. They signed the contract that same day, Darius and Keisha both adding their names to a document that formalized what had been informal for too long. It felt strange to turn family relationships into business transactions, but it also felt necessary, like finally installing guardrails on a mountain road that had been dangerous for too long. The new arrangement started the following Monday. Instead of waking up to urgent knocks on my door, I woke up to my own schedule, with childcare hours that had been planned and agreed upon in advance. Instead of being available for every crisis and convenience, I was available for the 20 hours we'd negotiated, with anything beyond that requiring separate discussion and compensation. The difference was immediately apparent. My time felt like my own again, even when I was spending it caring for the grandchildren. The children adjusted to more structure and predictability, learning to plan ahead instead of assuming grandma was always available. Darius and Keisha learned to manage their schedules around realistic childcare arrangements instead of unlimited free labor. Most importantly, I started remembering who I was when I wasn't being useful to other people. I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd been wanting to do for years, but never had time for when my schedule belonged to everyone but me. I joined a book club at the library, where I met other retired women who were navigating the balance between family obligations and personal fulfillment. I even went on a few dates with a gentle widower from church, discovering that I still enjoyed the butterflies and anticipation of new romance. The grandchildren thrived under the new structure. Instead of taking my presence for granted, they looked forward to our scheduled times together with excitement of something special rather than something routine. We baked cookies and played board games, and worked on art projects with the kind of focused attention that's only possible when time has boundaries and expectations are clear. Tiana, now 15 and wise beyond her years, was the first to comment on the change. "Grandma," she said one afternoon while we were working on her college application essays, "you seem happier now. Like, really happy, not just pretending to be happy." Out of the mouths of babes. Children see things that adults learn to overlook, and Tiana had been watching me disappear for years without understanding why the grandmother who used to laugh and sing and tell stories had become someone who was always tired and never quite present. "I am happier," I admitted, looking up from the essay we were reviewing. "I love y'all just as much as ever, but now I love myself too. That makes a difference." She nodded like this made perfect sense to her, because 15-year-olds haven't yet learned that women are supposed to sacrifice themselves for family love. "Good," she said simply. "You deserve to be happy." The baby was born in early spring, a little girl they named Grace, perhaps understanding finally that grace was something to be grateful for rather than something to be expected. I was there for the birth, holding Keisha's hand through contractions and welcoming my sixth grandchild into the world with joy that felt clean and uncomplicated because it wasn't tangled up with resentment and obligation. I provided postpartum care for 2 weeks at my regular hourly rate, helping Keisha recover while teaching her techniques for managing 6 children without depending entirely on external support. It was professional service informed by family love, and it worked better than either pure family help or pure professional service would have. The invoice I'd sent that day, the one that shocked them into recognizing the value of my labor, still hangs framed by my front door. Not because I'm proud of the confrontation, but because I'm proud of the boundary. It reminds me daily that love and labor are different things, that service is a gift when it's chosen and a burden when it's expected, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a family is teach them how to function without you. People still ask me about it sometimes, usually with a mixture of admiration and horror. "How could you charge your own son for babysitting?" they ask, as if family love should be measured by the amount of free labor you're willing to provide. I tell them the same thing I told Darius and Keisha that day. There's a difference between helping and being used, and the day you learn that difference is the day you stop apologizing for saving yourself. My retirement now includes 20 hours a week of paid childcare that I genuinely enjoy because it happens on my terms and with my consent. It also includes 48 hours a week that belong entirely to me, filled with art classes and book clubs and gentle romance and all the dreams I'd been saving for someday, while I was busy being indispensable to everyone except myself. The grandchildren are learning that love doesn't mean unlimited availability, that boundaries are expressions of care rather than rejection, and that the adults in their lives are whole people with needs and dreams and purposes beyond their service to others. These are lessons that will serve them well when they become adults trying to balance their own needs with their obligations to others. Darius and Keisha are learning to parent without unlimited backup, to plan realistically, to value the help they receive because it's chosen rather than expected. They're becoming more resourceful, more appreciative, and more capable as a result. And I'm learning that it's never too late to reclaim your life, even from people who love you. Especially from people who love you, because real love wants the beloved to flourish, not just to be useful. The story isn't over. Grace is crawling now, and Tiana is applying to colleges, and the twins are learning to read, and Marcus is asking questions about everything in that exhausting, wonderful way of curious 4-year-olds. There will be more crises and celebrations, more requests for help and opportunities to serve. But now I approach those moments from a place of choice rather than obligation, of boundaries rather than unlimited availability, of self-respect rather than self-sacrifice. I help because I choose to help, not because I'm expected to help. I give because I want to give, not because my worth is measured by my willingness to disappear into other people's needs. That $1,000,000 invoice saved me from a different kind of poverty. The poverty of spirit that comes from forgetting your own value while you're busy adding value to everyone else's life. It bought me something more precious than money, the reminder that I am not free, I am priceless, and those are not the same thing. The day I learned the difference between helping and being used was the day I stopped apologizing for saving myself. And that, it turns out, was the day I finally learned how to love my family and myself at the same time.